Dr. Abraham Twerski, director of the Gateway Rehabilitation Center.
The alcoholic must realize that he is not in control of alcohol. He must come to the realization that he is powerless over this chemical. The vast majority of alcoholics, before they get into treatment, refuse to recognize this. So we at Gateway direct a significant portion of our treatment to help the individual make this recognition. And as has been said, the diagnosis is often the majority of the cure. For the alcoholic, his realization that he has indeed the illness and cannot control alcohol is a significant part of the cure. Another factor which we stress at Gateway is that the individual is obviously going to be faced by many stresses in daily living. And he's going to face these stresses in and out for many years. And he has to learn how to adjust to stress without resorting to a harmful chemical. He has to find the strengths within himself. He also has to learn how to utilize that invaluable resource, which is the help of other people.
Blue Cross and Blue Shield are pleased to cooperate with KQV Pittsburgh in bringing you One for the Road, a report on alcoholism. Blue Cross is more than just hospital bill protection, and Blue Shield is more than doctor bill protection. Blue Cross and Blue Shield are health service organizations interested in every aspect of the community they serve, and alcoholism is a major threat to the community's well-being. Blue Cross and Blue Shield. They're in the health business, but they're not in it for the money.
Bottle of wine, fruit of the vine. When you gonna let me get sober? Leave me alone and let me go home. Let me go home and start over. Rambling around this dirty old town, singing for nickels and dimes. Times get rough, I ain't got enough to buy me a bottle of wine. Yeah, bottle of wine, fruit of the vine. When you gonna let me get sober? Leave me alone, let me go home. Let me go home and start over. Pain in my head, there's bugs in my bed. My pants are so old that they shine. Out on the street, I tell the people I meet to buy me a bottle of wine. Whoa! Bottle of wine, fruit of the vine. When you gonna let me get sober? Leave me alone, let me go home. Let me go home and start over. Bottle of wine, fruit of the vine. When you gonna let me get sober? Leave me alone, let me go home. Let me go home and start over. Bottle of wine, fruit of the vine. When you gonna let me get sober? Leave me alone, let me go home. Let me go home and start over. Let me go home and start over. Let me go home and start over.
Jimmy Gilmer's Bottle of Wine, Summer Wine, Sweet Cherry Wine, Scotch and Soda, and even Lawrence Welk's Bubbles in the Wine. All are songs that drown the real story. We don't see anything lyrical or amusing about a serious problem. How serious? The most visible victims of alcoholism are the inhabitants of Skid Row, yet they represent a mere 3 to 5% of the alcoholic population. Most alcoholics today can be found in middle-class homes and in executive offices. Alcoholism is not peculiar to any sex or socioeconomic class. 1 in every 12 persons over the age of 18 is an alcoholic. 7% of the entire adult population manifests the behaviors of alcohol abuse. Among the more than 95 million people who drink, about 9 million abuse alcohol. Over 5% of the nation's workforce is alcoholic. A substantial number of teenagers also face alcohol problems. Estimates based on a recent survey by the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse show over 57% of boys and 43% of girls aged 15 through 20 years are hard drinkers. For the year 1970, the projected total number of drinkers 15 years of age and over in this country was well over 95,000. 50% of all alcoholics come from the disturbed background of alcoholism in one or both parents. Half of all first admissions to mental hospitals in this country suffer from alcoholism. Twice as many heavy drinkers than moderate or non-drinkers are likely to develop throat and mouth cancer. In addition to intoxication, the illnesses associated with alcohol abuse include emotional disorders, chronic progressive diseases of the central nervous system, diseases of the liver, heart, muscles, gastrointestinal tract, and other organs and tissues. Over 50% of the automobile accidents involving fatalities also involve the use of alcohol. More than 26,000 Americans die this way each year. And public intoxication alone accounts for 1/3 of the arrests reported annually. Such alcohol-related offenses as driving while under the influence, disorderly conduct, and a chronic vagrancy constitute 49% of all recorded arrests. Alcohol abuse and alcoholism drain the economy of $15 billion each year. Of this total, $10 billion is attributable to lost work time in business, industry, civilian government, and the military. $2 billion is spent for health and welfare services provided to alcoholic persons and their families. Property damage, medical expenses, and other overhead account for another $3 billion. Excessive alcohol intake is associated with 1/3 of all recorded suicides. There also exists a strong correlation between the use of alcohol and crimes of a violent nature. Alcohol has been linked to most assaultive behavior patterns that do not involve death. But a comprehensive investigation of almost 600 criminal homicides recently showed that 55% of the offenders had been drinking. No less than 9 complete studies of the role of alcohol in murders have revealed that the median percent of people who had taken alcohol prior to committing the crime was 54.
Once you're in this thing with working with alcoholics, and also myself being an alcoholic, you can see where alcohol has played a real role in anything that turns out to be a disaster. I have been going in and out of courts for a long time now. I have been visiting the Western Penitentiary for 16 years. And I have met men in there that, we used to have times that we thought was fun, but after I checked back over my own life and have been able to talk with these men, there's never been any times of fun with them and drink. I've had the occasion to meet a man that had cut his wife's head off and didn't remember doing this because he was intoxicated. I believe him. I know what he's talking about. He's talking about a blackout where he can walk and talk, but he's numb and dumb. He doesn't know what happened. And so here he wakes up and they tell him that he has done this, and he just has to go along with it because all indications point to it that he was the man that was guilty of doing such an act. And yet the man is now sober, and you're able to talk to him, and you see that he's a fine guy. It's just that booze, when he got a hold of that juice, it just stole it and robbed his mind, and he made an act of like this that he has to go to prison for the rest of his life.
A study of drinking problems in Pennsylvania by the Department of Health shows that 1 of every 8 adult Pennsylvanians is an alcoholic. As of 1970, there were 944,000 alcoholics in the Commonwealth. Another 8,000 have been added in the past year. The numbers represent a 50% increase in the problem over the past 10 years.
There are probably as many definitions of alcoholism as there are alcoholics. The definition that we as clinicians tend to use is that a person is suffering from the disease of alcoholism when alcohol begins to affect one of the 3 very important spheres of his life. When he begins to have feelings about himself due to his drinking, for instance, anxiety and guilt. When his family relationships begin to suffer because of his drinking or because of his abuse of alcohol. And lastly, when it begins to affect his employment. Now, when I say affect his employment, I don't necessarily mean that he begins to miss work, but that his work is affected adversely by alcohol.
Charles Ninus is coordinator for consultation and education at the Alcohol Clinic, St. Joseph's Hospital. Alcoholism is a disease. Dr. Joseph Newman, director of the Western Pennsylvania Alcohol Institute.
The feeling is, to a large extent, historical. You see, we looked upon alcoholics, persons, since there seems to be a large volitional effort in this. You know, they do this because they want to. Then hence people are reaping the fruits they sow, and hence since people presumably prefer this way of life, then they're getting their just rewards. So they have this highly moral kind of approach that many. And then also, if we look about ourselves, we find that we're very ambivalent in our attitudes towards alcohol. You know, virtually everybody drinks.
Dr. Morris Chafetz, director of the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism.
It's not too uncommon with a lot of our value systems where almost anything you do is okay as long as you don't get caught with it. And I think that our society feels that if everybody uses this drug and somebody is foolish enough to get sick with it, this must be a bad person. What we don't recognize as a society is that nobody wants to be an alcoholic, and anybody who gets into difficulty or illness state with it is doing so because he does not have the ability to control the development of that. Now, this is a very serious problem. We have estimated that there are better than 9 million alcoholic people in this country, affecting close to 40 million people. We know that there is a $15 billion annual economic loss related to alcohol. The relationship to death, violence, murders, suicide is enormous. It is a problem that affects almost every facet of our social health problems, and we have been looking the other way for far too long.
Again, Dr. Newman.
We see as a tremendous lack is the ignorance among people concerning, not only among the lay individuals, but among professionals. There seems to be a ignoring of this problem, which is a very interesting phenomenon.
Ignoring in what sense?
Ignoring in the sense that they prefer not to deal with alcohol persons. There's a certain stigma attached to dealing with. We seem to feel that people who have alcohol problems, have some moral defect, and they don't recognize it's a disease that is devastating as any other kind of disease we can talk about.
Well, when you say they, who are you referring to?
I'm referring virtually to every professional group.
Most people never realize how comprehensive their Blue Cross protection is until they have to use it. Blue Cross benefits cover your room, board, general nursing care, operating room, laboratory tests, drugs, and all the other services regularly provided by the Blue Cross participating hospital for the full number of days provided in your Blue Cross agreement. In 9 times out of 10, Blue Cross covers the cost of needed hospital care in full. Blue Cross says, let's take a healthy attitude toward life. Tonight's program is brought to you as a public service by Blue Cross of Western Pennsylvania and Pennsylvania Blue Shield. If you would like free literature on alcoholism and its treatment, write to Blue Cross and Blue Shield in care of KQV, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, 15219. Alcoholism is a disease, a devastating personal disease that is different for each person afflicted. A disease that reaches out to involve most of those who come in contact with the victim. Dr. Joseph Newman.
Alcoholism is an extremely devastating disease. It affects roughly, it's estimated, generally that there are 9 million alcoholics with problems. Now, they're untold millions who are approaching this alcohol problem. So by an alcohol problem, we mean when the intake begins to interfere with one's daily activities, that it begins to disrupt one's efficiency. This is when we regard this as a problem.
The disease alcoholism is not the story of a man or woman's love affair with a bottle. It is a vicious problem that spills into every aspect of the victim's life. Most of all, it injures the family. Dr. Abraham Twerski explains.
The active alcoholic can create a great deal of havoc within the family. He may be squandering the family's resources, drinking his pay away. He may be not only verbally and emotionally abusive, but it's conceivable that he becomes physically abusive. And as a result of his behavior, the family becomes not only negative toward him and hostile and belligerent and rejecting, but also, since they feel that his drinking is voluntary, they become extremely critical because they think he is doing all the harm that he is doing intentionally and without any concern for their welfare at all. On the one hand, the alcoholic believes that he does not have an illness, and with the people around him thinking that his behavior is simply ornery and obnoxious and not recognizing that he has an illness, the two seem to agree on this one major error, namely that the patient is not sick. And as long as he is not sick, no thought is given to the need of appropriate treatment.
The alcoholic adversely affects the mental health of at least 4 other persons. Charles Ninus, St. Joseph's Hospital.
Many families are suffering with the disease of alcoholism, are living with it, and are not aware that this is the problem that they're living with. And if they knew this, they may try to get help even though the alcoholic may continue to drink.
In other words, they know there is a tremendous problem within the family structure, but they haven't pinpointed it to the alcoholic in the family.
Right. They, for instance, they tend to get into dealing with the problem like the alcoholic does. In other words, the alcoholic tends to say, well, if my boss wasn't such and such a way, I wouldn't drink. If this wasn't such and such a way, I wouldn't drink. The family tends to see the problem that way too. Although they may see his drinking, they don't know how to go about dealing with it. And they tend not to see it as a central issue in the family. Many times a spouse will say, how will I get my husband to stop drinking, rather than how can I begin to organize my life living within the family despite what he decides to do or not to do.
There is help available for the family of an alcoholic if they realize that their efforts can be a large part of recovery. Dr. Twerski.
It is extremely important that the people who live with the alcoholic be involved in adjusting to his recovery and in helping him to reach the recovery. For example, the husband admitted to Gateway after perhaps the first or second week will have a joint counseling session with his therapist and with the wife as well. In addition, we strongly urge the families of individuals with alcoholic problems, whether this is husband, wife, brother, sister, father, mother, to become involved in the Al-Anon family groups. These are people who have had experience with problem drinkers in their own families, and they gather in regular sessions. They're available through the Pittsburgh telephone directory listed under Al-Anon, and we strongly urge participation in Al-Anon by all individuals who have an alcoholic in their family.
Beyond the immediate family, the alcoholic represents a large problem for his employer and his fellow workers. Dr. Merle Bundy is Director of Industrial Medicine for United States Steel.
The role that alcoholism plays in the safety record is probably fairly enormous.
Is there a good deal of research on this problem?
More and more, industry not only are looking not only at the performance and the absentee records, but there's a growing interest in what role this plays in the production or the occurrence of accidents, and I think just as they have really looked at this in the people who are in automobile accidents, I think we're going to see a great deal more of this in our day-to-day activity in industry.
Within industry, alcoholism is such a problem for both labor and management that there are right now more than 4 million men and women suffering from early, middle, or late stages of the disease. Aside from the cost, alcoholism induces friction with co-workers, lowered morale, bad decisions, and deterioration of customer and public relations. And since alcoholics are most often in their middle years, the disease represents a loss of training knowledge for younger workers.
Alcoholism as a disease is most important and most significantly useful in handling cases in industry. Frankly, unless it is handled as a disease, I don't think you get very far in the control of the disease alcoholism, because it's it must be handled this way and cannot be handled on strictly a moral or a legal basis. Alcoholism is a problem in industry because most of our people are working, and it's no different in the steel industry than in any other, and the various figures have been quoted as from 3 to 6% of the working force have a problem of alcoholism.
U.S. Steel and 300 other major firms have already adopted some form of positive action for employees suffering from alcoholism. Additionally, many unions have launched similar programs. At Alcoa, a policy statement has been used since 1963, recognizing alcoholism as a disease and providing that no more stigma be attached to the alcoholic than to a person with any other disease. A man with alcohol problems is referred to a company physician who makes the diagnosis. The employee is then directed to available services within his own community. The recovery rate is estimated at between 60 and 65%. Even with these progressive programs, the problem of alcoholism as it affects American business continues to grow. The alcoholic problem, serious for business, devastating for the family, is also society's concern, yours and mine.
Of course, where do you usually find that most of the drunks come from? Is there any particular places?
Here's one right here. We're just going past it right now. Right here.
You find there are sections of the city like this one here, we're over on the north side, without naming particular bars. Do you know that if you go over on the north side, call primarily, you're going to usually end up with a drunk?
Oh, yeah. In fact, we're going to drive down one street in particular where that's automatic. You get a call, that's automatic. But as a general rule, these aren't bad people. I mean, they don't give you a hard time. The thing that may not sound right to you, it's your businessman that's on a drunk is the one that gives you the rough time. Now, it may sound strange, but that's true.
If you're in a local place, you try to avoid the police. The only time that you would even think of calling the police is if the guy really got out of line. And your best approach is to walk over and calmly say to the guy, if you do not leave, or if you don't want to have a cup of coffee, or if you don't want to sit down, if you insist on having a drink, I have no other choice but to call the police, and I'm sure they'll be here in 5 minutes. Now, generally this works with the clientele that I have because they don't need the publicity. It's not the average guy's going to say, well, I don't care if you call the police. It's going to be the guy say, well, I better leave because I have a job here, or I have an important job here, and I can't afford to be taken in for drunken or disorderly conduct.
Pittsburgh Police Superintendent Robert Colville.
Well, I think if you examine the number of arrests that are made by the city of Pittsburgh, you find that in the year 1971, we made something like 26,000 arrests. Of those 26,000, 9,000 were directly attributable to alcoholism. They were common drunk arrests and drunken driving arrests.
What happens to the common drunk, as you call him, when he's arrested? What happens to him when he's brought in?
Well, there's two ways in which he may come in. He may come in the instances where he knocks on our door on a cold winter night, has no place to stay, and we take him in as what we call a lodger. Or we may pick one up in the street in that same condition, and he is brought in as a lodger. Now, an individual may be arrested for just intox alone by the way manner of his walk, and becomes a hazard to traffic, etc. But generally in all of the cases in dealing with the alcoholic, the only thing that happens to him is that he's brought in the following morning before the magistrate. The magistrate fines him $10, which he obviously does not have. Being an alcoholic, he generally doesn't have anything on him. and the sentence is suspended by the magistrate, and he is turned back out into the street for another day. And generally we pick him up maybe that night again, or 3 or 4 nights later for the same thing. Well, it's just sort of a turnover center. The inebriate center for the county of Allegheny at one time was, of course, the Blawnox workhouse area, but it's no longer in existence. It's been taken out. So unless the man needs medical treatment of some form, he can get into a hospital. Other than that, the only thing that really happens to him is he spends a night sleeping in a jail.
Hello, I'm Johnny Cash. I hear the train a-comin', it's rolling around a bend, and I ain't seen the sunshine since I don't know when. I'm stuck in Folsom Prison, and time keeps dragging on. But that train keeps a-rolling on down to San Antone. When I was just a baby, my mama told me, son, always be a good boy, don't ever play with guns. But I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die. When I hear that whistle blowing, I hang my head and cry. There's rich folks eating from a fancy dining car. They're probably drinking coffee and smoking big cigars. Well, I know I had it coming. I know I can't be free. But those people keep a-moving, and that's what tortures me. Freed me from this prison. If that railroad train was mine, I bet I'd move it on a little farther down the line, far from Folsom Prison. That's where I want to stay. And I'd let that lonesome whistle blow my blues away.
The law itself is antiquated in the sense that, a common drunk, when I use the word common drunk, that's a legal word of art because that is the reference is made to in the statute. When a man is arrested for common drunk, there is not too much that a police officer can do with him. He hasn't got the right to take him to a hospital and have a physician he can do one thing with him once he arrests him, and that's bring him to jail legally. If he moves off of that, he's acting, on his own. And if he acts improperly, of course, he's subject to any kind of a suit that might be brought by whether it be the drunk or the drunk's family or the alcoholic, who may not feel he wants the particular treatment the officer is giving him.
The alcoholic suffers in jail, his family at home. Again, Superintendent Colville.
One of the major ones, of course, is the domestic disturbance. The individual who drinks and comes home and begins fighting with his wife or his children. And, the police officer, of course, is brought in as the referee in this domestic type of thing. It's a social problem, again, which which many times I think society says, when they get a bad social problem, they make it illegal and say to the police, okay, now you control it. Obviously, we can't, and obviously, we get a high rate of recidivism on this type of case. We're going back to the same family weekend after weekend after weekend. That's, I think, one of the common ones that occur. One with juvenile alcoholism is its delinquency and that occurs. The other one, I think it resolves itself in the crime, is the aggravated assault and batteries, or the assault and batteries, which occur as a result of altercations or fights between peoples who, are steady drinkers or, constantly drunk. I guess alcohol also, and this doesn't necessarily go to alcoholism. Alcohol plays some part or some role in many crimes, of lesser degree. Alcoholism doesn't have the problems of drug abuse in some senses, because the alcoholic doesn't need a large sum of money to supply his habit, which of course the addict does. So you don't get the same type of burglary, robbery type of conduct out of the alcoholic. He can generally get drunk at a very nominal fee. Take a bottle and it will cost him $5. That, for an addict, that won't even be a starter for a day's,